Gondor was first attacked on June 20, 3018 when the forces of Mordor launched a surprise attack on the ruined city of Osgiliath. However, while the eastern half of the city fell, Boromir the son of Steward Denethor successfully defended the western half by destroying the last bridge that crossed the Anduin River. 9 months passed after the skirmish in Osgiliath when Saruman sent forth a large army to destroy the people of Rohan. They were, however, defeated by the forces of the Rohirrim in the Battle of the Hornburg. After this decisive victory, Aragorn revealed himself to Sauron through the Palantir of Orthanc, which spurred the Dark Lord into action, making him send his armies before the full force was prepared. He decided to release his long-prepared army in hopes of quickly annihilating his greatest enemy, Gondor, before aid could arrive. Due to the threat of the huge fleet of corsair warships sailing from Umbar, the southern fiefdoms of Gondor sent far fewer people to aid Minas Tirith's defense than expected. There was no dawn between March 9th and 10th. This was the day which is called the Dawnless Day. A large cloud from Mordor silently crept over the lands of Rohan and Gondor, covering the sun and preventing sunlight from penetrating the clouds. Sauron's purpose was to instill fear amongst the army of the west, and also to ease the passing of his minions who feared daylight. On that same day, an army from the Black Gate emerged and captured the island of Caer Andros. The purpose was twofold: to prevent the Rohirrim from reaching Minas Tirith, and to attempt to cut off the garrison at Osgiliath. The muster of Rohan, led by King Théoden, left the camp at Dunharrow, the beacons of Gondor being lit 1 day prior. During the Dawnless Day, the ring-bearer Frodo Baggins, Samwise Gamgee, and their guide, Gollum, approached Minas Morgul. When they arrived, they saw the Witch-king of Angmar that emerged from the city on a black horse, accompanied by an army stated to be larger than any that departed from the Vale since the time of Isildur. This was the smaller of Sauron's forces, the larger host issuing forth from the Black Gate. On March 11th, Denethor sent forces to reinforce the garrison at Osgiliath, expecting a large blow from the enemy. After giving a report to Denethor, Faramir left to command the garrison. That night, they were attacked by the Witch King's forces, who had been joined by Haradrim regiments. Following their successful overrun of the city of Osgiliath and subsequent massacre of Gondor's relief force sent to liberate it, the army of Mordor began to cross the river in force under the supervision of the Witch King and Gothmog. On March 13th, the Orc forces assembled for battle on the fields of Pelennor, complete with drummer trolls, catapults, and siege towers. The host was so large altogether that it stretched wider than the city itself. Upon arriving at the city, the enemy sprawled before the main walls of Minas Tirith, and quickly put up siege equipment in dug trenches. Also, a large force of orcs and Easterlings was sent to guard the northern roads against possible reinforcements from Rohan, and it put trenches and stakes on the road, enough to halt any charge. The invaders began to soften the defenses of the city. However, the outer wall of Minas Tirith, the Othram, built when the Númenóreans in exile were still strong, was as impregnable as the Tower of Orthanc. The siege engines of Mordor, while not penetrating it, were able to launch incendiary missiles into the lower city, setting it ablaze. The heads of casualties and prisoners taken in Osgiliath and at the causeway forts were also hurled into the city to demoralize the defenders. Soon, dismayed by the cries of the Nazgul and the seeming hopelessness of the defense, most of the men on the walls had fled into the second circle of the city. While a distraught Denethor refused to command the defense, as he thought the entire city was to be destroyed and Faramir was doomed to die. Gandalf and Imrahil then took charge, and inspired hope whenever they went. In the night, large siege towers were dragged to the walls to test the garrison. The main assault was launched against the Great Gate, the only vulnerable point in the wall, by a huge battering ram, called Grond. However, the resistance was stoutest at that point, and the forces of Mordor suffered high casualties. Grond was hurled against the gate 3 times, but on the third try, it managed to destroy the gate completely. The Witch King entered the city, with only Gandalf upon Shadowfax confronting him. At this moment, the horns of the Rohirrim sounded, forcing the Witch-king to leave and confront the new foe. Unknown to both Gondor and Mordor, the Druidanes secretly guided Théoden's armies safely through the Druidan forest via an old, hidden road built by the men of Gondor long ago. This allowed the Rohirrim to circumvent the defenses of the enemy on the northern road, and attack the forces of Mordor from the rear. Rohan was joined by men from Dunland who wished to journey to Minas Tirith to fight with Gondor against the Dark Lord. Due to the dismantling of the Ramaz-Ekor, Sauron's forces could not mount a strong defense, and Théoden's forces quickly overran the northern half of the Pelennor Fields. The orcs tried to oppose them with spearmen, but they couldn't stop the powerful charge, and were obliterated. The Haradrim cavalry tried to stop Théoden's forces but were also forced to retreat until they were halted by the appearance of the Witch-king. He then mortally wounded Théoden, who was crushed by his own horse, as all his forces retreated. At that moment, Éowyn and Merry rode up to face him. Éowyn killed the winged steed upon which he rode, and the Witch-king fell to the ground. He was unharmed by this, however, and he stood up menacingly, readying his mace. He swung at Éowyn, who managed to block the attack with her shield, which shattered under the great mace's force. Éowyn's arm was also shattered upon impact. She fell to the ground, and the Witch-king lifted his mace for a final blow. As he did so, Merry, who was behind him, stabbed him in the back of the leg with his barrow blade. The Witch-king was wounded, and Éowyn used this distraction to drive her sword into his face, killing him. With the arrival of the Rohirrim, the men of Gondor were encouraged and sortied from the city to attack their besiegers, beginning the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. During this, and afterwards, the Dunlendings and Rohirrim, under the command of Éomer, continued their assault, while footmen of Gondor launched their own counterattack, sortying from the gate while Imrahil, his swan knights, and Gondor's cavalry tried to reach the Rohirrim. Even so, they were all outmatched by the Mumakil and Haradrim as the enemy committed their reserves. As the tide of battle turned against Gondor, the men of the west were dismayed to see the corsairs of Umbar apparently arrive. Neither side knew that Aragorn and the Grey Company, with the help of the army of the dead, had vanquished the fleet of the corsairs in the Battle of Pelargir. The army of the dead repaid their debt to Isildur by driving the corsairs upon the ships mad, causing them to jump overboard and drown. After loading the ships with as many men of southern Gondor as possible, they sailed north to the battle. Upon arriving, the enemy found itself in a disadvantageous position, with their enemies where and when they least expected. The extra reinforcements brought by Aragorn punched a wide salient within the most vulnerable area of the Mordor host, severing the forces nearer to Minas Tirith and the ones close to the river Anduin. The men of Gondor, Rohan, and Dunland used this tactical advantage to the fullest, utterly routing the enemy with prolonged infantry charges and cavalry pursuit. The tactical and morale advantage was effective in turning the battle into a rout of the Mordor host. Most of the Mordor host was slain and the rest fled back toward the Land of Shadow, with many drowning in the Anduin. A strong force of Easterlings fought to the last man, and Gothmog rallied many evil servants across the Pelennor to fight while other orcs retreated. While they were decimated by the now numerically superior armies of the west, Sauron's remaining army inflicted considerable casualties among their foes. The battle was over by sunset, with most enemies dead and a meager few fleeing. The losses of the west were significant as well. In addition to the lost commanders, it was said by Éomer later that not 4,000 riders were combat-worthy, and the losses in the forces of Dunland were probably considerable as well. However, despite that, with the newcomers from southern Gondor and more arriving by prior order of Aragorn, even with all the losses of the battle and the 7,000 heading for the Moran Nan, the city was estimated to be better defended than before the battle, discounting the loss of the Great Gate. The battle ended with a grand, albeit costly, victory for the Free Peoples. Sauron meanwhile had suffered his heaviest defeat to date. His primary orc armies had been completely wiped out, the Haradrim so badly mauled that they were no longer a threat, and the Corsairs of Umbar were destroyed as a fighting force. Worst of all was the loss of his most powerful servant, the Witch-king. Yet despite the heavy losses, it was not a war-winning victory, and all was not lost for the Dark Lord, for he still possessed large reserves of orcs in Mordor and was prepared to carry on the war for as long as was necessary.